Hi folks, good morning, good afternoon. I hope you are safe and well. My name is Adam Minkley, Senior Projects Director with Reuters Events. Thank you for joining us for this webinar discussion about merchant risk in renewables. It's a super hot topic, and I'm really excited to hear about what it takes for lenders to back merchant projects. So a huge thank you to all of the panelists for joining us today. This webinar is one of several pieces of work that we're doing in the run-up to the grand finale, our virtual Future of Renewables Global Conference, which is taking place on December the 8th, where global executives will chart the path for the 21st century energy system powered by renewables. It's super exciting. We call it a renewable world order, and we invite you all to join in the movement. So more info about the Future of Renewables event will be sent to you tomorrow, along with the full recording of today's webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to your chairperson, Kat Gamache, who is Senior Partner at Norton Rose Fulbright. Kat has a wealth of experience in developing ideas and negotiating virtual and physical PPAs. So you're in perfect hands. Enjoy the discussion, and don't forget to submit your questions via the Q&A feature. So that's it from me. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you, Adam. Again, Kat Gamache with Norton Rose Fulbright. And I would like to thank Reuters for inviting me to moderate this panel. And also just for all of the exceptional educational events that you've been hosting. Underscoring the importance of our industry, one of our panelists, Martin Torres of BlackRock, he's based in New York, he's without power due to the hurricane overnight. So he is actively trying to connect. Hopefully he'll be able to, but otherwise we wish him the best of luck and everybody hit by the storms.
Thanks, Kat. Hopefully you can hear me. I did make it on.
Yeah,
oh,
you're right there.
Great. So, okay, now you have everybody's sympathy knowing the circumstances that you're operating under. All right, so we have a limited time today, and this is just a fantastic panelist with a bunch of different perspectives. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce yourself and your company, and then just briefly state what your current activities are in this market. And Danny, how about we start with you?
Sure. My name is Danny Spletstasser. I'm the Vice President of Origination and Investor Relations with RES. RES is a global pure play renewable energy company. We focus mainly on development, construction, and operation of wind, solar, and battery storage facilities across the globe.
David, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. Thank you, Kat, and good morning, everybody. My name is David Pressman. I'm Director of Business Development for Origis Energy. Origis is headquartered in Miami, Florida, with offices in Austin and San Diego. And Origis is a utility-scale battery storage developer, financier, and long-term owner-operator. We've built about 1.2 gigawatts of solar projects in the U.S. in 8 states since 2013. And I work on our corporate VPPAs across the country and lead our greenfield development efforts across the western half of the country in WEC, SPP, and ERCOT.
Thank you. Erin, let's stay in Colorado.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Erin Decker. I work in Schneider Electric's Energy and Sustainability Services Division. Specifically, I'm a director in their clean tech consulting practices. And so we help organizations set and then execute on global renewable energy strategies, whether that's transactions or commodities, other pieces. And so I think salient to this conversation, Schneider Electric has advised on almost 8 gigawatts of power purchase agreements globally. And I've personally supported about 1.5 gigawatts of that, all corporate renewable energy PPAs. So we work with a lot of the organizations here who would be partners to our clients trying to navigate these kind of deals.
Thank you. Let's go up to Benoit.
Hi, this is Benoit Leo. I'm a managing director at Capital Dynamics. Capital Dynamics is an asset manager. We roughly have $6.5 billion of assets under management in clean energy. Our portfolio now has over 150 assets, 7.5 gigawatt, and we own roughly 6.7 gigawatt of solar. We're the second largest owner of solar in the United States. We're also in the storage business. We have 2 gigawatt hours under construction right now. And we're also in the distributed generation business with our partnership with Soul Systems.
And last but not least, Martin.
Great, thanks, Kat. Martin Torres here. I'm responsible for the Americas for BlackRock's renewable power equity investment platform. And so we invest in renewable power projects around the globe, really running from onshore, offshore wind, utility scale solar, distributed scale solar, and battery storage. So it really sort of covers the spectrum, not only of sort of the renewable technologies, but also geographies around the world.
Great. So as I said, we have an excellent panel. So let's get right to it. We're talking about merchant renewables. And I have represented energy investors for many years. And historically, the rule of thumb has been if you do not have a long-term PPA with a creditworthy off-taker, no money. So on our planning call, I asked all of you if you have any pure merchant in your portfolio. And just to clarify some of the lexology here, that means no hedge agreement, no contractual counterparties. The only person who said that they had pure merchant in their portfolio was Martin. So Martin, if you could just let us know what induced the development of these projects and how are they viable? And if everybody else could just go on mute while Martin's talking, I think we're getting a little feedback.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we do have projects that currently operate on a merchant basis, and a few of those projects were operating merchant at the point at which we made the investment. We did not develop the projects or build the projects that were specifically referenced. We acquired them a few years into their operating life, albeit the developer had done so on a merchant basis. And again, I think long dated contracts are if they're structured appropriately are obviously our preference. But we can find value in merchant operating. And to be clear, these are wind projects, not solar projects.
And I mean, can you share a little bit about the calculus that went into getting comfortable with acquiring these projects?
Sure. So when
investors would say, "Are you crazy? There's no PPA."
Sure. No. So we were very sort of thoughtful in our approach to assessing the forward merchant markets portfolio project. So portfolio of about 6 or 7 projects with about 4 running merchants. So in a portfolio context, there was a bit of contracting, albeit discrete assets had no contracts associated with them. So as we went in purposefully, thoughtfully around the investment. We spent a lot of time analyzing the energy markets. We had brought on commodity expertise into the platform, prior to making the investment. And so really looked at each of the assets where they sit at a very granular level, and not only analyzed, sort of the market into which they're selling, but also, all the transmission considerations from the point of interconnect as well. And so, we took comfort with our views on for merchant pricing, but at the same time, part of the strategy has been to focus on recontracting the assets at a certain point in time, as we held them. And so we've had some success in contracting one of the projects. Again, I would say it's the fact that the balance remain merchant is not a function of a lack of contracting appetite out in the market, but rather, given where we underwrote the investment, we're looking for, if we're going to contract the remaining uncontracted assets, we want to make sure that the contract is of value relative to kind of our underwriting case.
Great, thank you. And is anybody else looking at pure merchant, even if you don't have it? And if so, just how are you assessing these risks? How are you thinking about them? Benoit, let's start with you.
Yeah, just to pick up on what you said earlier, is it feasible? And you've got to go back to the fundamentals of how projects are put together. If you take a solar project, 40% of your capital structure is going to be tax equity. If you take a wind project, it's probably in the 60 to upwards of 70%. And these investors, structured investors, do require a contract to backstop their investment. So the reality is that, if you wanted today to do a pure merchant investment in the United States, you would have to be a balance sheet investor and monetize yourself depreciation tax benefits and investment tax credits, production tax credits in order to do that.
Okay, so you think it would only really be possible for somebody who can monetize the tax attributes, the tax subsidies?
That's right. You do potentially see this in the smaller space, especially in markets like New Jersey, where you will have an SREC that is highly valuable. You'll have an owner, who will take the investment tax credit, and basically the value of the power is dwarfed by the value of the SRECs. But by far and large, the United States is quite different from what you see in Europe, where folks are now winning contracts that are purely merchant, or building projects, that are purely merchant.
Okay. And that I should probably just explain here too. We are really going to focus on the U.S. market here, but our panelists do all have some international experience, and so I have asked them to share it where applicable. So that gives me some pause. Do you think with the tax credit step down, there's no real future for merchant? Should we not really be thinking about a future for merchant, or how do you feel about that?
Well, the step down on the solar side is to 10%, so there's still a tax credit. And if you look at the value of a project, a big portion of it is from accelerated depreciation, and that's not going away. So it is still a tax-driven type of investment. The danger around investing in merchant is really, the uncertainty for the capital. And ultimately, I think that this asset class has attracted a lot of institutional capital interest by virtue of providing yield and certainty of that yield. If the market decides to move to merchant, it's really not going to be on the same equity return expectations. There'll be much greater risk. And, beyond this, there are plenty of utilities, cooperative, municipal utilities that, are interested in signing long-term PPAs. So I feel that the debate on merchant has more to do with interest, in particular from corporates, to shorter tenor, 10, 12, 15 years. I even heard 7 years. But that in itself is fairly discrete in the market. It's a very small share. And I don't know a lot of investors that, are truly interested in that kind of exposure.
Okay. All right, those are some great insights. So let's turn and talk more about these quasi-merchant projects that do have either bank hedges or corporate PPAs. And I know everybody on this call is very familiar with these. And I think we'll drill down and get into some of the specifics of the corporate PPAs. But first, I'm just really interested, and I think the audience may be interested in some of the other unique products that we've seen in the market and how they've worked. And for that, I want to start with Danny, because RES a few years back in 2015, I think had among one of the first ancillary service hedges for merchant storage in PJM. And I was wondering if you could tell us about that opportunity and how it panned out.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. The PJM storage and ancillary services market was really a relatively small market, but I think it provides sort of a little bit of an insight to some of the challenges of merchant, and essentially where we were at is we identified an opportunity to be able to provide regulatory services using energy storage, and the cost point had reached a spot where utility scale storage at scale could be able to provide frequency reg within PJM. That once we passed that tipping point of sort of for that particular service, a grid parity point, the market really got crushed. We were not the only, we were maybe among some of the first, but we were not the only. And quickly, what looked like a very valuable market sort of collapsed underneath the weight of the fact that the technology could, really provide that service. And, projects that came online even 12 or 18 months later had a lower cost point and price point due to the scaling and learning that was happening in the industry. And, that same frequency reg market today is essentially, been squashed by the amount of, renewable energy, storage capacity that was dropped in to feed that market. And I think that's also kind of an interesting sort of look into the larger concept about bringing renewables merchant into a market. And when I started in renewables over a dozen years ago, we're always talking about how do we reach subsidized grid parity? How do we reach grid parity? And in some markets and in some places, we have reached and surpassed that grid parity point. And now we're really challenged with the fact of, once you pass grid parity, the cost trajectory continues to come down. And so you end up in a situation where for the long term, the next project that shows up a couple years down the line has a better cost point to compete in that same merchant spot. And so to some degree, echoing Benoit's point, it was the case that you need a long-term contracted asset to be able to, provide certainty that you can get return of your capital invested and return on your capital invested. And now it sort of works the other way. If you don't contract your asset, there's a real risk that over time, those, the project 5 years from now will be able to beat you in that merchant market. And you could be in a spot where you have uncontracted assets that you will never be able to find a home for.
That sounds chilling. And I believe you had a nice term for this on our planning call, value cannibalization. Which I think
that's exactly how we think about it. It's just the cannibalization of the technology, and I think solar and battery storage follow much more of a technology play than you would see from wind. Wind is very much due to the sort of diversity of resource. It becomes, merchant is much more of a local or nodal problem, whereas with something like battery storage, and particularly what we're experiencing now in solar, it's more of a market-wide challenge. And it's not a challenge today, and I don't want to paint that dire picture now, but that value cannibalization really starts happening once you get to about 15% market penetration. And the high value daytime, solar energy that you were betting on becomes less and less and less expensive over time. And you know, you see that today in sort of the classic tale of the California duck curve. And for us, we're just waiting for when the Houston Chronicle puts something on the front page of, you know, California's duck lands in Texas, and that will happen at some point around sort of 10 to 15% of market penetration.
So you mentioned storage. I mean, how do you think that storage is really affecting that calculus? Because a lot of people have said that, well, storage has solved the duck in California. I mean, is that making the opportunity for other renewables to be purely merchant more viable?
I'll challenge that it solved the duck, but I agree that energy storage absolutely is a game changer. I guess from our point of view, if you are investing in contracted or, you know, assets that have even a 15-year VPPA on them, you know, through one of Aaron's clients, in year 16, you are still betting a significant portion of your return of capital and return on capital invested is going to happen in a future energy market. And so, you know, today we are designing our projects to be storage ready so that as the market changes, you have the ability to add storage and really incrementally add it as the cost point to the storage and the value of, you know, offsetting lower and lower and lower sort of midday peak prices, you know, goes down. So that the fundamental change in the electricity markets, you know, happens as you drive in more solar, and storage can help to offset that. It won't happen all today, but I think it'll increase in scale and frequency in terms of the amount of hours added to solar as we go forward.
Great. All right. So let's get into the VPPA concept and the corporate PPA. David, I know that Origis and you personally have led several deals, some of them across from Aaron's clients. I'm wondering, how do you sell these projects, both internally and with your investors?
Sure. So there's a handful of criteria that we look for when evaluating corporate VPPA opportunities. And but before I jump into that, you know, most investors in solar and wind projects have traditionally, before looking at corporate VPPAs, invested heavily in utility PPAs, which have long 20-25-year contract terms in most cases. Utilities are about the most investment grade asset class you can possibly find. So these investors feel comfortable investing 10 or hundreds of millions of dollars in a project investment based on the certainty that they'll get their money back over the long term 20-25 years of this contract. So the corporate market is a little bit different. You have many investors who are a little bit all over the place in terms of their size, their asset profile, whether they manage energy consumption internally or they hire a third party. So we look for a handful of attributes so that these projects, you know, mimic or are similar to these utility PPAs that investors previously invested in as much as possible. The first is our counterparty as the seller and operator. The buyer needs to be investment grade. They need to be there. We need to have some confidence that they will be there over the duration of the contract term. We look for at least 15 years in contract term in our contracts. And there are, you know, requests we find every day from the market for entities looking for 10 and 12-year contract terms, which completely understand if you're a corporate, but in our shoes, or if you're an investor, these projects, we assume they will have a 35-year asset life. And if only 1/3 of that asset life is contracted, it just creates a lot of, it's a bit of a black box as to, or just creates uncertainty as to where our revenue will start to come from the later 2/3 of that asset life. So that creates risk for us. It's also very difficult to get your money back on initial investment, assuming 2 and 3 cent corporate PPAs, which is what we see these days, if you only have a 10 and 12-year contract tenor. So we're looking for an investment grade counterparty. We're looking for a 15-year plus PPA. These, market conditions are very sensitive. There are some markets, SPP and CAISO are very challenging right now. The nature of the corporate market has moved toward hub settlements instead of settlement at the node. And what that means is that I, as a developer and operator, need to manage basis risk going from where my project node, or I'm injecting power into the grid, to a trading hub, which is a common point, basically an aggregation of many different project nodes. So I have to get comfortable with that risk in a given market, understanding that I may have a sense of what that basis risk is going to look like the first, say, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, but after that, I have a lot of uncertainty. And we look for fairly standard contracting terms, commercial terms and legal terms that banks and other lenders have seen dozens of times before and are very comfortable with. Surprises and exotic T's and C's are not good for our business as you're trying to build these very expensive assets. So that's generally what we look for.
And are you looking to these because the utility PPA is not available?
Well, in some markets, ERCOT, Texas is a great example. You have market deregulation, and you don't have these utility monopolies you have in other parts of the country. And the number of corporate off-takers who have industrial or commercial load in ERCOT, dwarfs the Austin Energies, the CPSs of the world, utilities who are interested in signing long-term contracts. So as a developer, I want to get my PPA signed so I can get the project financed and eventually start putting steel on the ground and getting it operating. So this is another type of customer that I can look to in markets where, there may be fewer utility buyers.
Danny, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've been seeing the rise of the corporate PPA, and RES has been one of the early adopters of working in the PPAs alongside folks like Erin and her clients. I think what we've seen is that corporate America has, in many cases, changed its tact faster when it comes to adding social and environmental responsibility goals into how they conduct business, and I think that's just happening faster. And so we're just getting a new source of demand in the market, which I think overall is beneficial. It allows more renewables to reach the market than if we were just waiting for the more methodical process of going through an IRP and then a full solicitation sort of every 2 to 3 years from a utility. This allows more contracting points to happen faster. So overall, we're very encouraged by having folks like Erin and her clients in the marketplace.
Interesting. That's a really good point about the speed in which these deals can get done versus the historically tediously long utility system. So Erin, let's turn it to you. Everybody wants to know, we have these great virtual PPA products. What are your clients looking for?
Yeah, I mean, Danny, I totally agree that, I used to be in the corporate sustainability world. That's actually how I got into the space. And the reason that corporates are doing this is because climate change policy in this country isn't moving fast enough. So just to be really clear, and I know that a lot of investors and developers don't like some of the risk needs that clients have to do to get this approved. But the fact is, this is getting a bunch of renewables built, and maybe the long-term investors will see if they benefit from it, but certainly developers in the short run, it's a great source of demand, and there's a lot of nuances there. Most, if not all, of our clients are doing it to meet environmental goals. It's totally voluntary. There are no mandates making corporates to do this. They really want to push new renewables on the grid. The leaders do. And then they're pushing their customers and their suppliers. And so we're seeing all kinds of other corporates follow. So sort of the pent up demand for corporate renewable procurement right now in the world, but certainly in this country, is pretty high. There's lots of companies that have set 100% renewable electricity targets, and they haven't necessarily contracted. So it's a good space from a demand perspective. And for people who don't know, is really what corporates are doing is they are taking de facto the merchant risk on these projects. So they are the ones exposed, not entirely, but partially to the market risk, the difference between the fixed price of what they're paying the developer and what the wholesale market is doing. And so they're doing it not because they think they're going to make money on that. It's actually pretty risky for them compared to a utility who can pass those risks and any mistakes right on to all of the ratepayers, such as companies and you and I. They are doing it for impact, and they're doing it for the renewable energy credits, and they're trying not to lose their shirts while they're doing that. And so, as the market's evolving, and we can talk about this a little later, they would love to have examples where they could sort of share in some of that merchant risk exposure while reducing their risk, because for the most part, what they care about is break even or better and getting the renewable energy credits that they need in order to make their claims against these really aggressive goals. So thinking about what they're then looking for in a project as we help them or they go through sort of a procurement exercise, they're definitely looking for a developer who understands the market well enough that they can give them a price that they can stand behind. It's a weird market in that you sign a PPA first, and then the developers go and try to get financing if they're not doing it all sort of on their balance sheet, which is extraordinarily rare, especially if you're talking about the tax equity part of it. And so what they're looking for is a developer who has an offer that meets their sort of financial hurdle requirements, but also that there's certainty that this is going to ultimately get financed, which happens well after, obviously, the PPA. So they're looking for that. Most of them are looking because of that, the vast majority, not all, are looking as much as they'd like to impact locally where they have operations. There could be value there for them in terms of just matching their own procurement or having a local story. It's actually quite challenging. There are only a few markets in the United States, if we're talking about the US, that you can actually do these kind of deals, and you can do them in such a way that they seem like they'd be economically viable. So that really pushes them away from maybe matching load perfectly in where they have their own electricity used from their operations. Yeah, so they're looking for the right economics, the right partner, and some of them have the requirements, just no locked up that David talked about, but there is also a whole set of them that may not be investment grade, and so they're looking for partners who can work creatively with them and put a package together and a deal that would allow them to move forward. So it's pretty complicated for the entire market, but the demand has obviously had a big impact, and it'll be interesting to see how it will continue to change and grow as the overall market changes.
Are some of your customers who are not creditworthy actually getting these deals done? You said that they're getting creative. Can you share some of that creativity? I know there's probably some secret sauce, but
not really. If they're not investment credit grade, then they have to provide some kind of credit support, right?
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So and there is some creative things, and one of the ways this might be happening. And I don't know how much developers love this, but certainly they're looking at overall credit risk on a project. So if you have one entity who might be low investment grade or not investment grade, and then if they took the whole project, that would be a problem in terms of investors looking looking at that and saying, I don't like that. But if you have a sort of amalgamation of different offtake structures on there that would provide enough credit support that it reduces the risk to developers and to investors, that would work. So we've certainly seen, packages put together really on the developer side, but on our side as well, that says, hey, this client may not have the perfect investment risk, but if they're a smaller percent of this project, that reduces the risk and it can still move forward. So that's one creative way. But yeah, there is no world where there's no credit support provided. It's very different to have an investment grade entity versus one who says, I'll give you a couple years of a letter of credit to stand behind my payments.
And how are they finding the projects? Or what, I guess I should say, what should somebody like Danny and David do to find your customers and make a match?
Well, certainly, obviously, we're in the advisor space, and they are both well acquainted with our process, which is typically a competitive RFP process on behalf of our clients. I would say not the vast majority, but the majority of corporate deals are done with an advisor helping, such as ourselves. Some of the bigger, tech companies who are early in the space might be doing bilateral deals directly. They have the staff, and then there's kind of a middle ground of corporates who are trying to do that themselves, maybe without an advisor, which has some pros and cons, I think, for both the corporate and the developer. But yeah, the market's pretty established at this point, and larger developers, I think, know exactly, whether they work through us, our competitors, or directly with those corporates who are reaching out. I think that's actually pretty well established. The harder part is finding the right partner in the right deal, I think, than sort of getting your foot in the door with a customer. I don't know, they might disagree, but I think most developers appreciate advisors such as ourselves too, because we really do help our clients understand the risks, as well as try to move them towards contracting that is financeable, which is, I think, a challenge in the market. If you're a corporate who doesn't really understand the market and you're trying to contract, then you might have these sort of special terms that really are going to be a problem for your counterparty.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. This is all quite complicated, just as David said, managing basis risk, and Danny managing the future challenges and unknowns.
But Kat, it doesn't have to be that way.
All right.
It doesn't have to be complicated.
Benoit, I know you've been biting your tongue. Please share.
No, but it's the comment is that you can do physical deals. And I think it's fantastic that more and more corporates are buying renewable energy. I have Walmart as a client. I have Amazon as a client. I have Apple as a client. All of these are physical deals. We just announced the largest behind the meter project in the United States with Switch. So, I just want to encourage corporates to look at physical delivery. These are much more simple deals. In the case of Nevada, it's complicated because it's a 704B, so Switch is outside of NV Energy's network and is allowed to buy from the wholesale market. But there's plenty of situations where you can build behind a meter and basically offset retail rates. I do have concerns, and I appreciate that Erin does a tremendous amount of educational work for corporates when they think that they're going to save money, and in fact they're buying into a merchant curve with a hot settlement, and they might have to write a check for the next 15 years because in fact that curve is not what it's going to be. So I love the fact that corporates are going for renewable energy. Switch is 100% and has really a committed core investment thesis. But I just want to encourage everybody to first think physical before financial settlements.
I think more of our clients would like to do that. You're talking about big data center companies who are bringing massive amounts of new load to utilities. That's a very different situation than, even large industrials who have been in spaces in the Southeast for a long time. And they, corporates are trying to push policy. I always say it's completely crazy that corporates have to do these kind of deals to meet their goals. if we had climate policy that was moving utilities towards this, or retail electricity providers, whoever is the, we have this weird patchwork of electricity to get to corporates in this country, but they're not, and they are not moving very fast. And so every corporate I know is basically saying, who's aggressive on this, is saying, I'm gonna do a PPA now because I don't wanna wait to make change for climates, for 20 years for my utility to get it together. If they are in there's very few utilities who are forward thinking on this, and you do see people taking advantage of it. And at the same time, they're pushing on policy. They're making demands and they're saying to utilities, we want more, and they're trying to work at the federal level. But I think we can all realistically say, given stranded assets, entrenchment, political issues, that could be 10, 15 years before those options are available. And so the reality is, unfortunately, that very few of our clients have significant amounts of load in places where they could do physical deals easily.
Well,
So
there's
they're
a lot
pushing
of
it on all
behind the
fronts.
meter. Yeah, there's a lot of behind the meter that can be done.
True.
I also say, companies like Facebook are meeting with utilities and they're changing the rules. And the reality is that, it's incumbent upon corporate customers to gang together, and they have very, very powerful associations to basically allow direct purchases outside of a utility. So you see this, and I think that's great. But I go back to my comment, which is people sign virtual PPAs and there's volumetric mismatch. It doesn't really correspond to the energy bill. They sometimes have to write a check. They're not always very happy. And what matters is that these customers are fully aware of the risk that they're taking.
Sure, and I know I'll stop talking so others can speak, but it's refreshing to be a woman dominating the conversation right now. I'm just kidding, but not really. Yeah, so, I think with that is that most of them, for our CFOs, where we go into conversations, they basically look at the range of outcomes, right? And there's always a negative range where they would have to pay every year over 15 years. And the vast majority of these deals gets done where they say, if that's what I have to pay every year to meet my sustainability goals, I'm okay with that. So keep in mind that for corporates, it's not just about a return. In fact, I think most of them would be happy to break even. It is really about those renewable energy credits. So that helps the value proposition. To your point, early deals that got done, the merchant curves, as well as the wholesale electricity prices have plummeted, since 2015. And early players, including some of the big tech companies, are certainly losing a lot of money on those early deals and probably would wish that wasn't the case. But I think the market has shifted considerably since then.
I would weigh in, and I would echo Aaron's point that these transactions between someone like Origis and, Benoit mentioned Walmart, these are happening because there's a void of utility involvement in the middle. Utility is the natural middleman for these projects. If I'm signing, we have some green tariff or green sleeve projects in Alabama and Georgia, and those customers, in those deals, I have a PPA with Georgia and Alabama Power, and the utilities are sleeving my energy in RECs through to Target, Walmart, Apple, Johnson & Johnson. And that is a natural partner. Those are three-way transactions that make a lot of sense because that removes my credit risk, that removes my need to manage basis risk, which I have to do in places like Mid-Atlantic and Texas. I think everyone here would love to do more of those PPAs, but to Aaron's point, there's a void right now, and she's working with her clients, and I'm working with her and her clients to help fill that void. So these projects can get built, and the projects, of course, serve as an energy hedge to the T-Mobiles of the world. Shout out T-Mobile. So I think everybody's trying to move as quickly as possible, but there is a utility middleman that's missing in a lot of these projects, which could, their involvement could ease everyone's pain a little bit. And we see that in some places. We see that in the Southeast. We see that in places like Arizona with SRP. So this is happening, just not everywhere so far.
Yeah, and I think we saw a great example of that with Google and with Excel as they moved to really have, and sort of listening to both of them talk about this. Google was happy to sort of get back out of the direct procurement position, and Excel is happy to re-intermediate themselves between a consumer of power and the generator, and play that sort of traditional role. So I think that is kind of the natural evolution. I mean, ultimately, utilities have individuals as customers. They also have big corporates. So, although utilities may be slower to respond than other types of companies, companies tend to respond to consumer demand. So I think that to the extent that you get that aggregated consumer demand from the corporate buyers, sort of targeting the utilities, that is the model that will probably evolve. And I know we're sort of sticking to the United States here, but the one comment I would make from an international perspective is that there are other countries around the world where we're seeing this dynamic play out, where corporate buyers of power are putting pressure on host utilities, particularly in areas where those utilities otherwise had true monopolies in being able to procure directly from renewable projects. And the utilities are taking a very early lead in re-intermediating themselves and starting to offer contracts from markets where you used to have a feed-in tariff that's kind of disappearing, to make sure that they continue to control the customer. So it'll be interesting to see kind of as that evolves here in the U.S. as well. But we're seeing early signs of it.
Yeah, the other side of the equation that we haven't talked about, and it's great to have Martin on the panel and David, is really the ownership side of all of this. So there is tremendous pressure from corporate off-takers to sign shorter deals. But when you deploy institutional capital, you have to strive towards contracted return. And we've deployed on our last fund 1.4 billion. My portfolio has 23-year average PPA. I think we're above 5% contracted return. And when we look at deals that are 10, 12, 15 years, you're basically not money back. And you have to keep the humility that you represent teachers' retirement funds. You represent, firemen and police and the likes. So there's a disconnect between expectations of shorter term deals, which leaves a lot of merchant exposure for investors, and the appetite of these investors for really, having an investment that is protected.
So one concept that I'm hearing here and that gets debated quite often is, in this virtual PPA context, who is the winner? We've heard about some corporates getting their shirt handed to them where they thought they were going to get a bunch of money. We have developers. Is it, do you want to get in, get a contract, and then get out? And then I know, Benoit, you had said that sometimes that leaves owners with disgruntled customers. And then I've also heard David the other day say that he expects to see a bunch of projects defaulting on these VPPAs in 5 to 7 years because they're not assessing the market accurately. Does anybody want to take that on who is the winner in this scenario?
I'll step in. I think Aaron said it perfectly. It is about education and expectations. If a customer what they're entering into, then the customer is happy. The complexity is when we've seen historically some project where projections were made around return that just didn't pan out at all. I've also seen projects being built in areas that didn't make any sense. So I think a good example was a project in Oklahoma very, very large technology company, and they executed a proxy revenue swap. So that's a mouthful, but basically there was tons of basis risk. And I caught up with the executive who executed that proxy revenue swap with that wind farm. And I asked him, I said, so how did that go? And he said, well, everybody lost. The developer with that PPA did horrible, but even us as a company, we didn't do well at all. So it's the enthusiasm of renewable energy needs to be tempered with, let's install project where they need to be installed, where the grid has enough transmission capacity, where there's not all of these ancillary issues that create problematic projects. West Texas, I'm not going to name names, but there's an operating project that has $8 of basis risk in solar. And we're seeing gigawatts of solar all being installed exactly in the same spot. It's just a time bomb. So I look at these things, the announcements are great, but the fundamentals of a good location and a good project is critical to everybody's happiness.
I think these are complex transactions that everyone here is working on. They're a lot more complex than simple utility busbar PPAs, and I think there could be a lot of pain, to Benoit's point, once these projects start operating down the line, as we see greater levels of solar and wind penetration, which is going to drive down wholesale prices. And a lot of this has happened in the context of the last 3 or 4 years, where financing has been incredibly, not incredibly, but fairly easy to acquire. And there's been a lot of money out there that's looking for projects, especially in a extremely low interest rate environment where investors are looking for yield and are not getting that from traditional vehicles like bonds. So they invest in renewable energy projects, expecting some certainty, and they may not get it. So I think there could be some pain ahead, and people are going to pick themselves off the mat and need to be a little more careful in understanding what the risks are. That's both on my side as a developer and operator, and on the side of some of Aaron's clients. So this is a problem of exuberance that we're going to have in the near term, which it's not a bad thing to put more gigawatts of wind and solar on the grid. I get up every morning excited to do exactly that, but this is a problem of exuberance. That's it.
I think maybe just to sort of follow up on that, and also to touch on sort of a theme that Benoit was referencing, and really I think comes down in many ways to sort of having the right understanding, the right knowledge, the right expertise, to make investments appropriately. I mean, I think that to your original question, Kat, you got winners and losers in each one of the categories in different projects for different reasons. You may have an investor who doesn't know really what they're doing coming in, and therefore you might have, a developer who's very happy. You might have a corporate off-taker who managed to structure a contract where they left all the risk with the project. I know we've talked about a lot of corporates potentially being unhappy, with a corporate PPA, but one of the things that we struggle with for a lot of the projects that we look at is the project is likely to be unhappy one, the original investor, because the corporate has allocated all the risk back to the project. And so, I think that as long as investors have the requisite expertise, they should be making the right decisions coming in. So for any given project, that should mean that, if the developer had the right expertise in developing the project, that everybody, can come away happy. I mean, I think nobody should convince themselves that, like some commodity markets of old, that there are sort of massive wins that can occur in this market. We've seen that happen over the years, but that's not really the market that we've been living in for the last few years, and I don't expect that to be the case. So it is about making sure that your assumptions are valid, that you understand the structure of your revenue contract, that you understand the structure of the market that your project is generating within, and what the rules are. And so I think it's sort of that level of expertise that I think is warranted, and I think we are going to see some disappointed investors who maybe entered into the market thinking that renewable energy is much more simple than it actually is. And so I think that's where you're going to see some of the pain felt. But unfortunately, one of the messages that I'm sure Benoit, certainly myself, likes to spread to our investors and our firm clients is that with the right expertise, you can make the right investments. And I think that will continue to be the case in this sector for a long time.
Well, and I think the real winner are the tax equity investors. So if we don't have any tax equity investors on this call, and we can get into my opinions on that as part of the capital stack, whether that's the right way. But, and again, if there are these sort of mass sort of disruptions and defaults 5 years down the road, and it's a win project, they lose too. But let's be clear, they're the winners.
I used to work for GE. The reality, everybody loves bashing tax equity. If 1 year you plan to have tax capacity and you don't, and you have to carry forward these losses, it's really painful.
Yeah,
so,
fair enough. Still low.
The American model of basically subsidizing through taxes is far better than the European model, which was a feed-in tariff, where the ratepayers pay, and they feel that they're overpaying. So I've worked in Europe. Feed-in tariff, not a fan at all. I will take tax equity structuring any day.
Fair enough.
But it's I think that Martin and David, we see teasers every day. Somebody announced that have signed or they're about to sign a contract with company X, and they want to sell. And there is a need for a market for developers that are sellers. I hate the bashing of asset flippers. We have Danny on this panel. Rez has been a long time fantastic developer, great EPC contractors, a lot of really long-term contracts. It takes gumption. It takes a lot of hard work to permit projects and get them ready. It's where the market gets overheated is in places where you don't need to make any effort on development. I mean, ERCOT, I have it framed somewhere. The building permit is on a napkin, and basically the judge said there is no building permit. So if you have zero barrier to entry in a market, anybody can do it. And this is when you see city prices, city terms, and then that paper floats around until they find somebody to buy it. So I know that Martin's not buying it. I don't think David is. But there is an element of irrational behavior in some corners of the market that is just not healthy. And my hope is that we have a shrinkage of the number of developers and more credit given to experience, to credit, to all of these things, so that things get priced properly. And I certainly see with a lot of our off-takers, they love that we're long-term asset owners. And a lot of them get aggravated when they sign with somebody and then it's somebody else who's suddenly taking on the project.
Yeah, as the development flip model is part of what we've done, and I appreciate it, Benoit, that as being a constructor and also being willing to manage assets on behalf of investors, we try to have a longer view. And I think, particularly in ERCOT, and in Texas, the the challenge of being a developer, is no longer about can you get the land position. It's no longer can you manage the interconnection or the back of the napkin permitting process. The challenge is really understanding and being able to make very clear and concise asks of Erin and her clients about what we know and what we see about what long-term owners can and cannot live with. And I recognize that as Kat would, one of her colleagues would say, the wall of capital that has flowed into this space has created the exuberance for developers. There is no shortage of placement of the cash equity. There's always a new billion-dollar fund being raised every other week. And to some degree, I think the tax equity, that is the gating, that becomes the gating item in terms of building the capital stack, because at some point, even if I can find a cash equity position, that it might be their first entrance into a new market and they have that irrational exuberance to come in, you need to place the rest of the capital stack. And so for us as developers, particularly on the solar side, our biggest challenge is making sure that the contracts that we sign and the places that we place the projects, not just for the 15 years of the VPPA, but we really didn't dive into the remainder of the asset life, 16 and on, if we are going down a corporate PPA route. And so it's really important for us as developers to understand, even if we are not long-term owners, we need to be closely aligned with folks like David and Martin and Benoit, so that we know that the types of assets that we are going to invest millions of dollars into don't just float around and float around and float around until they go. And so I think, when it comes to defaults, Erin probably sees it first. There's a lot of corporate PPAs that start getting, written, and they end up, not finding a home for capital. And I think that particularly in tighter tax equity markets like we have right now, there will be a lot of corporate PPAs that won't find a home, and they'll either have to get recut, or there will be a little bit more of a flight to quality when it comes to, working with a long-term developer who's got a long track record, or a developer owner such as David.
Yeah, we're seeing that right now, that COVID
sorry.
is helping with that, in that some of the smaller developers, we do require sort of credit posting. It's not as if the PPA that gets signed by a corporate has nothing in it for the developer. If it falls apart, there is obviously a cost to the developer. And we're actually seeing right now a huge contraction of developers who are able to sign deals because of that. And I think if you're talking about exuberance or, developers who things may not be real, I think this is an interesting adjustment moment for that. We'll see what happens. I mean, there are probably some deals that look good that may not get tax equity financed or longer financed, but it is interesting when a market contracts and there's more risk that is just being thrown around in the capital markets. Definitely seeing an effect on deals right now.
Yeah, and it's to echo Erin and Danny, the COVID situation has really brought some discipline. So there's less tax equity, and in our conversation with the major players, it's pretty clear that the hedges in Texas will probably be the first to suffer allocation. A year ago, banks were talking about merchant tail financing. So beyond the life of a PPA, they would lend for another, say, 5 years. That's gone. Looking at it, it's a good thing. I don't really want to see over leverage of projects for the sake of it. So I think that from traditional lenders, and Martin has a storied career at Morgan Stanley, will agree to that. We're back in discipline. But it's one of the false narrative has been, well, we need to do these types of projects because there's no longer busbar PPAs, and that's a fallacy. There's tons of good quality busbar PPAs. You just need to work at it. And this is not my shop, but when EDF announced their project with NV, that's a great success. When 8 Minute signs, busbar PPAs, these are great success. So it's you don't necessarily need to do complicated because you have no choice. There are plenty of capital deployment opportunities outside of these riskier structures.
How do you look at the cash on cash yields though in those bus bar PPAs? I mean, the feedback sometimes that I hear from owners is that, you know, that's a great PPA. I'm glad that it's you know, at least, you know, but the returns are so low. The returns are so thin, and I do have owners that talk to me about, well, can we find a way to get a little bit thicker return in here? And, you know, very competitive, even hyper competitive PPA market, I don't know how I can satisfy, or I'm interested to hear how you think that we can better satisfy, you know, providing good returns for investors while also being able to compete for those gold standard, you know, physical or busbar PPAs.
Yeah, and I think the answer is that, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for Martin, we pass on 90% of what we see. You know, if a project does not have a contracted return, we just walk. You know, it's as simple as that. Or you would have to be in very specific situations. And storage in itself is a whole different ball game because it's not about merge, it's about volatility. But you know, we see plenty of projects that don't get done because of irrational exuberance on a busbar PPA pricing. And one of the realities behind all of this is that people bid based on projected capital cost, but as you know, you know, cost of building has flattened. And no, you know, I'm not yet seeing EPC cost with a 6 handle per watt. So, you know, you have sometimes, you know, somebody who has an interconnection position really wants to just turn over the assets, so they'll put a PPA bid, but if they can't find a permanent capital structure, you know, project doesn't get done.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've maintained discipline over the last few years, and that's meant that, you know, we haven't invested in some corners of the market. And, you know, that's just sort of the reality. And I think that, you know, it's probably a confluence of factors, and I think, you know, COVID will certainly be, you know, one of the more significant of those factors. But we'll see. Someone referenced the wall of capital, I think Kat did, but we'll see, I think, a lot of that, you know, institutional capital that isn't coming in behind, you know, sort of experience or a team, whether it's internal or external. I think that recedes, because I think that, you know, you're going to see investors recognize, to an earlier point I made, that, you know, these aren't bonds that they're buying if they're investing in a project. And there was a period of time where some institutional investors really thought about contracted, and using that term very loosely, but contracted renewable energy projects were just bonds. And, you know, even projects that have great busbar PPAs, long dated, you know, we still maintain you need an expert manager of those projects to ensure that you get your returns, because, you know, equipment has issues. You know, you have natural disasters. There are lots of circumstances that come in over the life of the asset where if you don't have an expert managing it real time, you know, you're going to lose value that you can't pick up. So I think, you know, it's ultimately a question of investor discipline. And then, you know, that discipline takes a bit of time to work its way through the system to actually start having an impact on pricing. And I think, you know, that's what it's going to take to really get at what we're all sort of talking about, which is getting a higher price per power for these projects. Because, you know, as Benoit was highlighting, there's two sides of it. There's the power price, and then there's the cost to build and the cost of the equipment embedded in that. And so, you know, it's not magic.
Not magic.
What,
All right, so
yeah.
I am loath to stop this conversation, but we do have a slew of questions and not nearly enough time to get through them, but I think we'll just go for another 5 or so minutes, and I'm going to kind of try to rapid fire some of these out so we can get some of the audience questions answered. And I guess we'll try to make these available to the panelists after and see if we can go about answering some of the popular ones that we see a lot of here. So first of all, Martin, what differentiation in discount rates do you use between a full merchant project evaluation versus fully contracted, all else being equal?
So all else being equal, without putting too fine a point on it, I mean, it's hundreds of basis points.
Okay. This is not assigned to anybody, but what is the general risk premium you would require for pure merchant versus long-term agreement PPA?
That feels like essentially the same question.
Many hundreds of basis points.
Yeah.
And I'm reading.
I mean, Kat, if you take the gas market, the traditional gas market would sign a heat rate call option with a term loan B and a bullet after 5 years, and you recontract. On the borrowing side, you're borrowing at 6, 7, 8%. That's just for the debt side. So on the equity side, you're double-digit return. That's what you would need if you're even within that risk appetite bracket.
And we have to think about this a lot, actually, with some of Aaron's clients. When I have a 100 megawatt project and they only have demand for 75 or 80 megawatts of that, we actually have to think about sizing the returns correctly for the uncontracted portion. So, we have to adjust our project level target rate of return based upon how much is going to be contracted with a credit-worthy off-taker versus how much is going to float. And it is double digits that, well into the double digits that we have to think about.
Good point. Question for Aaron. If the corporates only want RECs, why not just buy RECs for meeting their sustainability goals? Why buy energy and introduce basis and volumetric risk?
Because they care about getting new renewable energy built. So you've heard everyone on this call say that without a contracted off-taker, we won't do merchant. And so that helps get new renewables built. These guys need capital, and the developers need someone to be willing to pay. They may not like how many years corporates are willing to do that. But yeah, so these corporates are really doing it because they want to help enable new renewable energy getting built. So it's impact plus the renewable energy credit. Most unbundled, as we call them, renewable energy credits in the United States that exist in the open market come from already built projects. And so that would not have the same impact story.
And Kat, to expand on what Aaron said, outside of the corporate world, look at New York. You can get a long-term 15-year NYSERDA contract, but you haven't sold your power. And, projects struggle to get done in New York for that simple reason. So when you contract the green attribute, but not the power, it's a tremendous, wall, barrier to entry for new generation.
Great. This is another one mostly for Aaron, but open to everyone else. What has the PPA market been like for municipals and aggregate municipals? Do you think the MUSH market will expand as rapidly as C&I? How do you think about credit risks associated with muni aggregation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really complex question because no municipalities are all not created the same. I mean, if you're seeing, community choice aggregation happening in a lot of places in California, they've worked out some of those credit risk issues, but it's hard to do PPAs. I don't think investors like it. As far as other parts of the MUSH market, like schools, we've seen some universities do power purchase agreements. In some ways, those institutions match the risk profile and the long-term nature. They might be willing to do a much longer deal, which I think is good, but they can't move as quickly. It's pretty complicated. So we have seen that market moving less with sort of schools and other sort of MUSH things. I think municipalities, there's a lot of push towards wanting to be on the bleeding edge with climate change and helping, but it's pretty complex. So compared to the corporate market, I think we're going to see relatively slow uptake outside of places like California.
And COVID doesn't help on the muni side.
But just to be clear, the mush market is doing great. So there's I get pumped up to see so many schools install solar on their rooftops. It's a very, very fast growing market. We own a really nice portfolio with the University of San Diego. We're building right now in Colorado for University of Colorado in a nice campus with solar and storage. These are great customers. In reality, schools don't go away. If you have a big box store, a Target, we talk about credit risk. I had PG&E. That was investment grade. So schools, hospitals, they don't go away. These are the best customers you can get. The difficulty is scale, and it kind of goes back to what Aaron said. Like a big corporate likes to procure huge quantity. So you have to have the ability to deliver a corporate solution locally. And, that's the reason why we have the partnership with Soul Systems, because they've done a ton of these projects for corporate off-takers.
I think another key in this market is contract standardization across the board. And these projects have really long sales timelines with municipalities and schools, and they're not that many megawatts, which just makes it a muddled proposition for someone in my shoes. But there's really a need for people like Schneider in this space to help put projects together and kind of impose some market discipline and some process on clients and buyers.
So I am really sad to have to cut us off. I think that we could probably talk about this for days. This has been a really fun conversation, and clearly there's a lot of exuberance, and hopefully we are just going to get the education out so that we can all just wake up excited about putting more renewables on the grid like David. So thank you all for participating, and I will turn it back over to Adam.
Thank you very much, Kat. Thanks for moderating such a lively discussion. And thank you, David, Danny, Martin, Erin, and Benoit for your insights today. Thank you to all the audience for tuning in and engaging in the discussion. We appreciate all your questions. We have a host of upcoming webinars tackling some of the most recent challenges in renewable energy. So we'll keep you posted about those via email. Don't forget the Future of Renewables conference taking place in December 8th to the 10th. And we hope you can join us for that also. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.